A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Due to the rabbi's position on Kitniyot on Pesach, for example, some have concluded that you care nothing for customs and traditions. How does the rabbi respond to this claim?
First of all, one could point out that with regards to Kitniyot, for example, almost every single Rishon who speaks of this minhag, of this custom, was opposed and explicitly say of themselves that they ignored, or others reported about them that they ignored this custom altogether. So one could make the same claim against many Rishonim, such as the Rosh and the Tur and Rabbeinu Yeruham, etc., who also entirely disregard and discount that particular minhag. But that is with regards to Kitniyot only. We could discuss any number of minhagim, of different edot, different parts of the Jewish people, and of course there is no time to discuss all the minhagim in the world and to quote a myriad of sources on the subject. So I'll limit myself to one or two brief comments. We find in the Gemara and the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Megillah, Daf Kaf Daled, we find the statement that the Jews of Beth Sha'an and of Haifa and of Tiv'onin, that is the area known as Tiv'on today near Haifa, are not to be appointed as a Shliach Tzibur to repeat the Tefillah, the Shemona Esrei, in public, because they did not pronounce Hebrew correctly. That is to say, the Talmud says they did not differentiate between an Aleph and an Ain. Despite the fact that these people in these areas, this was their custom, this was their practice, and one assumes it was also their forefathers' practice to pronounce Hebrew in such a fashion, and yet Hazal say explicitly, and the Rambam brings this halacha explicitly in Ilchot Tefillah, that a person who does not pronounce things correctly is not to be appointed a Shliach Tzibur. In other words, we do not, when it comes to a question of truth running up against, or correct tradition, authentic tradition, running up against another incorrect, spurious tradition or practice, we do not necessarily adopt the position that that which people do is okay, or that if that is a person's minhag, then it is sacrosanct. Not at all. The truth and the halakha and the authentic tradition trump any spurious or misguided tradition or practice that people may have adopted or may have learnt, even if it is not of their own fault at all. This is how they were taught to pronounce Hebrew, perhaps, or this is how they heard Hebrew pronounced. The very same thing can be said with regards to the Abbas, who writes in his introduction to his Sidur, Beit Yaakov, that both the Ashkenazi pronunciation and the Sfaradi pronunciation of Hebrew is imperfect, and he mentions which things need to be corrected in both these pronunciations. He also did not believe that the authentic tradition and that which we know to be true can be overturned and overruled by what people do for whatever reason it is that they may be doing it. One could also mention Rabbi Nathan Adler, HaGaon HaGadol Rabbi Nathan Adler, who was the Rav of the Hatam Sofer, who is, as is well known, who, realizing that the Ashkenazi pronunciation of Lashon HaKodesh was incorrect, he came into contact with a Sfaradi Hacham. He assumed that this pronunciation was more correct, and it is in some respects, and it is also less correct in other respects, but he chose to adopt the Sfaradi pronunciation, and he switched from davening and learning, one assumes as well, but certainly davening, we know for a fact that he prayed using the Sfaradi pronunciation that he learned from this Hacham, which included learning how to pronounce certain consonants that he had never pronounced before, such as a Het or an Ayin, etc. And he relinquished the traditional, what was traditional for him till that point, and for those who lived in his part of the world, the traditional Ashkenazi pronunciation. Here too we see a great Hacham not necessarily being influenced or not accepting the fact that everything that is done is correct. Just because something is does not mean that it should be so. The very same approach we find in the Rambam as well. We find in the Mishnah, in Masechet Gittin, Perek Hamishi, the following statement. The following statements or halachot were said with regards to, or with the aim of preserving peace and encouraging a state of peace between Jews. Kohen kore rishon, aharau lewi, wa aharau Yisrael. The Mishnah speaks about the practice of calling to the Torah first to Kohen, then a Lewi, and then a Yisrael. And this is mipnei darchei shalom, so says the Mishnah. Rambam, in his Perush on this Mishnah, states explicitly that this only applies in a situation where the Kohen and the Lewi and the Israel in question are all equal in terms of their knowledge and greatness in terms of Torah. But if it is clear that one of their number is greater than the other in terms of his knowledge and understanding of Torah, then he is to be called to the Torah first, whether he is a Yisrael or a Levi or a Kohen, it makes no difference. This halacha, according to Rambam at least, applies only to a situation where there is no clear indication as to who is the greater scholar. And the Rambam was quite adamant about this. And he writes in his commentary, "V'ani mitpaleh ma'od," and I am very surprised. "Shegam anshe al Rom." Al Rom here refers to what was known in ancient times as Byzantium, the Balkan regions, etc., where there were Jews living in those communities up to the time of the Second World War, who maintained very ancient traditions. And he writes, "I am very surprised that the Jews of that area as well, noharim ken, that they also practice this custom of calling a Kohen first, even if it is against the what I have just stated," says the Rambam. In other words, even if there are Talmidei Chachamim, great Torah scholars present, they prefer to call a Kohen up to the Torah first. And this, the Rambam says, is wrong, that it should go according to Chokhmah, according to wisdom first, and only if this is not possible or not the case, only then does one go according to this order of the Mishnah of Kohen, Lewi, and Yisrael. He says, I am surprised that these Jews in these areas, who normally have very correct customs based on what we find in Chazal, in the Talmud, I am surprised, he says, "Shenoagim ken ala af heyotham nisolim mimigra'ot haminhagot umisfarot ha'achronim v'takonothehem." Even though they are normally free of all kinds of strange practices and customs and institutions of latter-day authorities. وَإِنْ أَسْلَمْ إِلَى الدِّفَرِيمِ هَمَّثِيمِيمْ لِرِشَنَوْتَ التَّلْمُودِ. And usually they follow the halakha as it should be, without any additions, and certainly without anything which contradicts or contravenes the halakha. I do not know how this situation in their case came about. What we see clearly from Rambam's commentary on that Mishnah is the following. That which the Chachamim laid down, and that which we know to be true, whether it is a question of pronunciation or a question of understanding what the Chachamim meant with regards to a certain halakha or a certain statement, that takes precedence over any custom or practice that people have adopted for whatever reason. The custom is not the yardstick, the truth is the yardstick, and therefore the Rambam expresses surprise that even those communities in that part of the world that he refers to, who normally follow the statements of the Chachamim without addition, without subtraction, and certainly without deviating from what they said, he finds it most unfortunate that in this case they too were influenced by a practice which he considered to be incorrect. We also have the famous statement in the Talmud Bavli in Masechet Rosh Hashanah Daf Tethwel, where as part of a discussion between two Chachamim, one says to the other, if people are doing something which is wrong, which is asur, even if that is their practice, we are not to allow them to continue doing so. In the words of the Talmud, Be'isura ki naharu shavkenan lahu, we allow them to continue to do so. As Rashi explains there, bitmiha, in other words, this is a question, this is a rhetorical question. That is, of course, not true. So, not all customs are clearly lead people to do something which is incorrect, but some customs do, and others are simply incorrect, even if they don't cause Jews to err and to contravene halakha. The essential point is that when it comes to minhagim, we have to examine each minhag on its merits and see whether it is possible to reconcile it with the Torah, with the correct understanding of the Torah or the halakha in this case, or whether this is something that causes confusion or unnecessary hardship, or whether it is based on a mistaken notion or assumption of certain individuals, whether those individuals were chachamim or not. The fact that something is done is not a sufficient reason for something to be allowed to remain or to be unchallenged. That is a position which relegates the truth to a very lowly position in the realm of Torah, and this is not the truth. The truth is that that which is true and that which is authentic tradition must always come before that which is a spurious tradition. And so therefore I am not opposed to minhagim. I am opposed to spurious minhagim. I am opposed to concepts and ideas and practices which are based on misinformation or disinformation, that are based on misguided understandings or interpretations that lead to negative and undesirable or even untenable results and circumstances. To those kinds of minhagim I am opposed, because it is the correct position to oppose those things which are rooted in error and lead to further error or to other forms of aberration. So when it comes to pronunciation, for example, to claim that if something is pronounced in a certain way by a certain person or by a certain community, this takes precedence over everything else, I would reply, why does this minhag, which we can prove is incorrect, take precedence over the authentic minhag, which exists perhaps in another part of the Jewish world, or that which we know used to exist? If that is the more authentic tradition, why should we prefer an unauthentic and inaccurate tradition over that which is an accurate and true tradition? Torah is, of course, based on tradition, and I am for tradition, I am for minhagim, as long as they lead us to the truth and that which is correct and that which is proper.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.